Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I believe everyone can see my slides at this point. So thanks for joining. I am going to do a quick review of the agenda. Like, what am I going to cover today? We're doing introductions right now. I'm going to talk a bit about the history of student loans and especially why the inequities are sort of built into the student loan system and why student loan abolition is very important as a economic and racial justice issue. And then we'll pivot into thinking about your student loans, helping you get a good sense of sort of where your student debt is. We're going to talk a little bit about Biden's loan cancellation plan. And then we're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness, especially the PSLF waiver program that is ending after this month. Then we'll kind of bring everything together, framing in terms of strategies and considerations in your repayment plan, and then we'll switch it over to Q&A. So just to introduce myself a little bit more, hello again, my name's Ethan Miller. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm a proud DSA member. I've been a financial planner for 5 years, and before that, my background was in the labor movement as a union organizer and in communications and research roles at a variety of national and local labor organizations. As a financial planner, I work with individuals and couples, many of whom work in public service or at social justice organizations on a wide variety of issues from retirement planning, savings goals, investment management, giving plans, tax planning, and of course, today's topic, student loan strategies. Some of you may also know me from my work with NPEU, the Nonprofit Professional Employees Union. I served as Secretary Treasurer there for 3 years. And I now work very, very part-time to support the union's finances and operations. And I do need to add just a brief disclaimer for today's presentation. The materials I'm presenting for you today are for general educational purposes only. I haven't considered your individual circumstances in preparing today's presentation, and nothing I say today should be construed as investment advice or tax advice. So with that out of the way, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how we got to where we are today when it comes to student loans and the state of financing higher education. So in 1940, 5.9% of adults 25 to 29 had a bachelor's degree or higher. So a very small percentage of people were attending college. College was just simply not expected unless you were headed into a very specific set of occupations. That rate started rising steadily. That rate of younger people headed to college started rising steadily throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and especially into the 70s, when about 23% of young adults were graduating with bachelor's degrees. That rate started rising again in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it now stands at about 39%. Of course, racial disparities in education meant that this increase was not equally distributed. College attendance and completion rates only started rising significantly for Black and Latinx Americans until the 1990s and 2000s. And for Black Americans aged 25 to 29, that rate of bachelor's degree completion was at 13% in 1990, went up to 18% by 2005, and it now stands at around 28%. So in terms of college attendance for all Americans, really we're looking at like the 1990s into the early 2000s. It's when we really start kicking it up to anywhere close to where we see it today. Meanwhile, rising education costs and administrative bloat in higher education, combined with systemic state disinvestment from public universities and stagnating wages, left many students with fewer resources to pay for the higher cost of college. So you can see how the rising cost of college, if you look at the chart, that's on the screen, you can see how the rising cost of college passed the amount that a student could expect to earn working a summer job at minimum wage. That amount crossed at about 1990, where that cost of average tuition and fees for a four-year public university crossed that threshold of what you could expect to earn in a summer. And now it's, at least double of what you could earn in a summer working minimum wage. So that left many working and middle class students looking for ways to pay for what had been promised as a ticket to better opportunities and higher lifetime earnings, which brought them to student loans. Since the early 90s, the average student debt load started rising tremendously. As an average debt loan at graduation, that number peaked in 2012. It's come down slightly since then, but not in any significant ways. And as a higher percentage of students have had to borrow for their educations, their debt has outpaced the rise in salaries for new graduates. So the ratio of how much debt somebody has when they're leaving school to the income that they're looking at, at graduation, that ratio was about 24% in 1990, so on average, and that has gone up to 54% today. So it's not just about the total student debt load that somebody might graduate with, but also comparing that to what is their earning power, and that ratio has gotten totally askew. So all this adds up to 45 million Americans who have some sort of student debt. That's 1 in 6, and the total debt load is $1.7 trillion. I believe it's the second highest type of individual consumer debt, behind mortgages. I think is the only thing that has a higher total debt load. And I think it goes without saying that student debt does not impact all Americans in the same way. Black graduates on average owe $25,000 more than white graduates upon graduation. And Black students are 10% more likely to take out loans than their white classmates. But across racial lines, student debt holds working class graduates back compared to their wealthier peers, forcing borrowers to delay life events. And I know I don't have to tell everyone here what student debt does to you, but delaying life events that would otherwise, people would otherwise want to move forward with, from getting married, buying homes, having kids, feeling a level of economic freedom. Student debt burdens can distort people's job choices, leaving many to stay in jobs that they otherwise would leave due to unsafe or otherwise undesirable working conditions, and generally kind of adds to stress levels that people have around work, income, their personal finances. I'm sure folks have experienced that firsthand. And of course, student loans are not held only by those who have graduated school. Many borrowers are folks who have not been able to were not able to finish the programs that they started, leaving them with a boatload of debt, but without any economic benefit of all of those programs. So those borrowers are the most likely to be in default on their loans. And while the debt burdens may be small, if they only took out loans for maybe 1 year of school, they can have a disproportionate impact on their lives. There's so much more that I could say about the ways that student loans impact the people who have them, who felt like there was no other choice but to take them on. Again, the societal pressures around college are, nothing like what they used to be. Everyone is told you have to go to college. You have to go to college. I do want to make sure we have time to get to the more practical side of the presentation. But it's clear that the rise in student loans is not sustainable, right? That incomes are not increasing along with the total student loan debt that people have to take on. To anyone who says that, loan cancellation isn't fair to anyone who paid off their loans in the past, obviously those people are just opposed to it, wholeheartedly. it's not really a good faith argument, but if you look at the numbers, it's clear that what is not fair is the amount of debt that people have to take on to get jobs that are not even paying that much. And increasingly, so many jobs are requiring not just an undergraduate degree. I only really talked about undergraduate debt, but many jobs are starting to require master's degrees for things that, you know, a few years ago only required an undergraduate degree. So that being said, I'm going to move on to the next part of the presentation and talk a little bit about helping you think about where you currently stand in regards to your student loans. Because every program that's out there, targets different sets of loans. And largely the biggest distinction comes down to whether your loans are federal student loans or private student loans. Private student loans are ineligible for pretty much everything. All of the programs I'll be talking about later in through the presentation. Private student loans, largely the only option when it comes to them is paying them off over time. Some loans, depending on the interest rate, you could refinance into a different interest rate. But largely the only option you have with private loans is paying them off. Certain private loans may come with certain repayment plans, but those are really up to the institution that gave the loan. They are not covered by any of the federal programs we're going to be talking about. Ironically, there's actually a limit to the amount of federal loans you can take for undergraduate degrees, which leads many to take out private loans. All of the private loans I see are usually from undergrad or refinanced loans for grad school. For grad school, you can take out an unlimited amount of federal loans. So it probably seems a little backwards, especially because of the number of programs available for federal loans. So a federal loan is a loan that is issued by the Department of Education. It is guaranteed by the federal government. There are different types of federal loans, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But private loans are issued by private institutions, often by banks, or special like higher education financing authorities. Often those are sort of state-backed, but they are still private student loans. Some may even be issued directly by universities, although those I think are a bit rarer these days. Among federal loans, which again, going forward, we're really only going to be talking about federal loans. There are direct loans, and these include loan programs that you may have heard of. The Stafford loan program is a direct loan, graduate plus loans, or sort of just direct subsidized or direct unsubsidized loans. It's all fall into the category of direct loans. There are other types of federal loans, the most common being FFEL loans or Perkins loans. Some of those are kind of a hybrid private loan. The loan was issued by the US government, but it's owned by a private institution. This is how they used to do it. Sort of pre-2009, there were a lot of those. They're called commercial FFEL loans. Understanding what loans you have is going to be important down the line. And the best way to find out what loans you have is on the Federal Student Aid website. If you don't have an FSA ID, you should create one. It's going to be important for sort of all of these different programs, applying and sort of tracking your progress through them. That on the Federal Student Aid website, that's where you'll be able to see, what is the type of loan that you have. Is it a direct consolidation loan, direct unsubsidized loan, a graduate loan, or is it an FFEL loan or something else that is not the same as a direct loan? Other things to make sure you understand about your loans are, what are the interest rates? What repayment plan had you been in before the loan pause starting in March 2020? What was your payment amount before the loan pause? When the pause is lifted at the end of the year, whatever your payment was beforehand, your monthly payment, that's going to be the payment that is restarted. So that's the monthly amount that you'll have to pay for the first time in January. It's also important to know that, especially for public service loan forgiveness, if any of your loans are consolidation loans, did you make payments on the original loans before you went through consolidation? And do you have a good sense of that payment history? The answers to all those questions are going to be important when making a plan for how you approach public service loan forgiveness. With regards to older loans, those Perkins or FFEL loans, I'm going to talk about consolidation in a little bit. There are sort of new details about how consolidation of those loans impacts your eligibility for Biden's loan cancellation program. So I'm going to talk about that just in more detail. I know it's on the slide, but I'll talk about that in more detail in a little bit. So starting with Biden's loan cancellation plan, because this is the newest thing, I think the thing that a lot of people have questions about. First of all, and I do apologize in advance, there's a lot of text on these slides. It's mostly so that the slides can be helpful as a resource, even separate from the presentation. I do apologize for all the text on the slides. I just want to make sure it captures everything that is necessary. So in Biden's loan cancellation plan, again, that was announced this past summer, we're told that the application should be out, kind of like any week now. They said early October. This loan cancellation plan gives all eligible borrowers up to $10,000 in loan cancellation if you did not receive Pell Grants for your undergraduate, or up to $20,000 in cancellation if you did receive a Pell Grant in college. It does not matter if your current outstanding loans are from undergrad or maybe they're from grad school. If you received a Pell Grant in college, you're eligible for up to $20,000 in cancellation, and everyone else is eligible for $10,000. There is an income threshold that must be met. So people are only eligible for the loan cancellation if you're single, if you make under $125,000 a year, and that's your adjusted gross income on your tax return, or if you're married, if you make under $250,000 of joint income. We still don't know if anyone here is married but files separately. We still don't know exactly how that's going to be treated. Those details are still not out. And this is based on, the income numbers can be based on either your 2020 or your 2021 adjusted gross income. So I know some people who their 2021 income was just above, their 2021 income was just above 250,000, but their 2020 income was just under 250,000. So because they have 1 year that is eligible, they are each eligible for $10,000 of forgiveness. Loans eligible for the cancellation plan include all federal direct student loans. Again, a direct student loan is one where it was both issued by the federal government and is actually owned by the federal government under a direct loan program. Parent Plus loans are eligible, and FFEL loans that are owned by the federal government are eligible. This is a portion of FFEL loans. FFEL loans that are those commercial ones that are owned by a private institution. The Department of Education came out this week and said that if you hadn't already consolidated that as of September 29th, that those loans would not be covered. Those loans are most likely, you would have those loans most likely if you took out student loans before 2009. That's really when those were stopped being used. But again, federal student aid, it's gonna be the best place to find out what your loan type is and who owns the loan. Canceled loans will not be included in income on your tax return. There are a few states that may count them. At my last count, there were 5 states that either had said that they will be counted or that it was just unclear. None of those are in the DC area. Just for reference, it's those states, and this may have changed since I last looked. Arkansas, Minnesota, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Again, that was last time I looked. I would expect that it may be different even at this point, or that may still change sort of before the end of the year. And that would be if, again, that would be for that, the forgiveness, that the cancellation you receive would be included in your income potentially in those states for your state tax return. And of course, the part of the plan was that the payment pause and the 0% interest period would be extended one last time until December 31st. I want to talk about one other thing around loan cancellation that is not on the slide, and that's if you made payments during the loan pause, right? So no one had to make payments since March 2020. I know many people did. They said, let me take advantage of this 0% interest period. Me put, some money towards my loans. If that brought you your total loan balance under either 10,000 or 20,000, depending what you were eligible for, you are able to get a refund of your payments so that you can maximize your cancellation amount. So the government says that they're doing that automatically. If you want to make sure you get the refund and the full cancellation, you can call your loan servicer and say, hi, I made payments during the pause. I didn't have to. I would like a refund of X dollars. Basically, if you say you got a Pell Grant in college and you currently own $18,000 on your loans, because you had made payments during say you made $4,000 of payments over the last 18 months, you should ask for a refund of $2,000 so that then your total loan balance would be $20,000, and that would be totally canceled, and then you would have no loans. So just to know that you can get a refund of payments made if you made them during the pause, or if you paid off your loans completely, you can actually get a refund back to get the forgiveness that you would otherwise be eligible for. Another part of Biden's plan is a new income-driven repayment plan. We only have the top level details of this so far. They haven't released anything in detail. I don't think we expect to really see anything until probably the spring when this would actually be rolled out. But it would change the way that payments are calculated. If any of you are on an income-based repayment plan now, the way it's calculated is basically they determine what is your discretionary income, and then they take a percentage of that to determine your loan payment. Under the new IDR plan that they're working on, they would raise the amount that is considered non-discretionary. So it would lower your discretionary income and change the percentage. So it would cap payments at 5% of discretionary income if you only have undergraduate loans, and it would be at 10% for graduate loans. They would have a blended rate if you have both undergrad and grad school loans. And most importantly, this loan would prevent all unpaid interest from accumulating as long as you're making your required payments. So a big problem with some of the income-based repayment plans is you make your required monthly payment month after month after month, and then a few years later, you end up owing more than you had originally taken out because the interest rates on a lot of federal loans are pretty high, and interest was just sort of accumulating even though you were making payments. So under the new plan, they're going to prevent unpaid interest from accumulating, which is a really big deal for a lot of people. There's a lot of details we don't know yet about this. The last thing is that, if the original loan balance was $12,000 or less, this plan would provide forgiveness after 10 years of payments. And for all other balances, the loans would be forgiven after 20 years. All the other income-based repayment plans are also about 20 years. Some of them are even 25 years. So this brings that down a little bit, although I wouldn't say that's a huge change. So again, there's a lot of details we don't know yet. Who might be eligible to enroll in this plan, if it's going to cover all types of loans, how they'll treat interest when you're moving repayment plans, things like that. Again, I'd expect to see more about this in the spring. But for the loan cancellation part of this, the application, again, should be coming out really any day now. They said early October, so I'm just waiting around for it. If this is going to wipe out your entire balance, then great. You should apply as early as possible so that you don't have to restart payments in January. They say that once the application's out and you've put it in, that processing will take about 4 to 6 weeks. So if the application comes out in a week or two, you put in your application. By the time January rolls around, your cancellation should take effect. And so they say before November 15th, but they also have to put out the applications before November 15th. But the loan cancellation plan is it's really great for people who owe a smaller amount on their loans. But for people who have much larger amounts that they owe, I see this a lot for people who went to graduate school. Again, because you actually can't take out that much in federal student loans for undergrad. This is going to be probably a more of a minor thing in your student loan story, and the bigger thing for you may be, if you work in a qualified job, the public service loan forgiveness program. So PSLF, as it's most commonly called, is a program that was created by Congress in 2007 to allow borrowers who make 10 years of payments on qualifying loans while working full-time for qualifying employers to have the remaining balance of their loans forgiven. The program has had its ups and downs, received a lot of flack in sort of 2017, 2018, when it denied 99% of applicants who thought they had completed all the requirements. At that point in time, there were sort of two problems. Borrowers did not have a lot of information about program requirements in the early years. Loan servicers actively led some borrowers down the wrong path. And the Department of Education, led by Betsy DeVos at the time, did everything they could to stand in borrowers' way and prevent people from getting forgiveness. So that really explains the high denial rate in those first few years. Things have gotten a little better, especially because of the waiver program, which I'll talk about in a second. But at the core of PSLF, there's sort of three main requirements. The first is you have to have qualified loans. So this gets back to understanding what type of federal student loan you have. So qualifying loans include all subsidized and unsubsidized direct and graduate loans. Older loans, again, those commercial FFEL, or actually all FFEL loans, Perkins loans, those have to be consolidated into new direct loans to qualify for forgiveness. Parent Plus loans also have to be consolidated. Often they have to actually go through a double consolidation. A caveat on loan consolidation in general, again, if you have one of those older loans and you want to pursue public service loan forgiveness, you do have to do this consolidation, but in doing so, you may miss out on the $10,000 or $20,000 of loan cancellation. So there's a choice to be made between a long-term sort of total cancellation or short-term partial cancellation. The second requirement of PSLF is to make 120 qualifying payments. Under full program rules, this means on-time payments for the full monthly balance that were made on or after October 1st, 2007, when the program was created. In order to qualify, payments also have to be made on either the standard 10-year repayment schedule or one of the income-driven repayment plans. And if you consolidated your loans under typical rules, your payment count drops to 0 after consolidation. I'm going to take this question just because I had just said this. You can do PSLF and the 10,000. The choice comes for people who have those older FFEL or Perkins loans. If all your loans were issued after 2009, 2010, most likely they're all direct loans, in which case you will qualify for the 10,000 and still qualify for public service loan forgiveness. It's only if you have those older loans. And then finally, the last requirement of PSLF is that those qualifying payments, those 120 payments, have to be made during periods of what is known as qualifying employment, a lot of qualifying in this program, which is why it's very easy to not qualify. That means you have to either be working at least 30 hours a week in either one full-time job or multiple part-time jobs for an employer, a qualifying employer, which includes all governmental organizations, public schools, local government, state government, federal agencies, all 501c3 organizations. And there are certain other nonprofits that qualify, but usually the rule is a 501c3 organization. Those periods of qualifying employment don't need to be consecutive. So you could work at a nonprofit for 5 years, go work maybe at a restaurant or something else for a few years, and then go back and work at another nonprofit and still qualify for PSLF. Just the payments you made in the middle won't count towards the 120 that you need. Qualifying employment must be a direct W-2 work arrangement. So if you're an independent contractor or you work for some like contracted service provider, which I see that a lot in the federal government, you're actually not building eligibility if you work for like a third-party contractor. And if any of you work at organizations where there's both C3 and C4 components, it's important to know who your employer of record is, so who your W-2 and your paycheck come from. In most cases, this will be the C3, but I do know of some organizations where the 501c4 organization is the employer of record, in which case you're not building eligibility for public service loan forgiveness. So those are a lot of rules, and there's clearly a lot of things that can go wrong. Maybe you were making payments, but you weren't on the right repayment plan because you didn't know which one you had to be on, or you were automatically put on one by your loan servicer. Maybe you had an older loan and you didn't know you needed to consolidate it in order to qualify. So those were all the baseline rules of the PSLF program. Last year, about a year ago, the Department of Education announced a temporary waiver program designed to give relief to borrowers who were finding forgiveness hard to reach due to the wide variety of roadblocks that the program rules pose. So the waiver lets people who are pursuing public service loan forgiveness earn credit for payments that otherwise would not have counted, which includes gaining eligibility for payments made on otherwise ineligible loans. They can consolidate loans together and earn credit for the loan with the most number of qualifying payments, and otherwise sort of get a level of a review of their PSLF payments, and hopefully, get just that much more credit towards forgiveness. So this is the really important part, is that to be eligible for the waiver period, borrowers must consolidate their otherwise ineligible loans and or apply for public service loan forgiveness using the employment certification form by October 31st of this year. So the reason we're doing this webinar now, and we worked hard to sort of find a date to schedule this, is because this period ends at the end of October. So there may be a few steps you have to take, and I'll go over those. There may be a few steps you have to take in order to get credit for past payments that otherwise wouldn't have counted. And this is a limited term thing. So if you fall into any of these scenarios, or even if you actually don't, and you just want to make sure you're gaining credit for public service loan forgiveness, if you haven't otherwise started the employment verification step, that's something you should start, and make sure you complete your employment verification forms for your current and any past qualifying employers by October 31st, 2022. And again, if you fall into that category of you have older loans that may be ineligible under the traditional rules, if you consolidate them, start that consolidation process by October 31st, and do your employer certification forms, then you'll make sure you're getting as much credit as possible. So this kind of all leads me to, and I'll come back to the sort of details on PSLF, I'm sure, during Q&A. But this leads me to a discussion of sort of an overall repayment strategy for those who either are now considering PSLF or were previously already working towards public service loan forgiveness. Because when pursuing PSLF, your repayment strategy should actually not revolve around paying down the balance of your loans. The balance of your loans doesn't matter in PSLF. What matters in PSLF is making sure you're getting 120 monthly payments. And ideally, you're trying to make those payments as small as possible so you can maximize the amount you ultimately have forgiven, and not pay as much towards your loans, basically. So this starts with enrolling in one of the income-driven repayment plans. Again, this is important for two reasons. One, you have to be in an income-driven repayment plan to build eligibility for PSLF. The other plan you can be on is the 10-year repayment plan, but if you're making payments over 10 years, by the time you get enough payments, your loans will have already been paid off. So you want to be in an income-driven repayment plan. All of those plans have key differences. Some of them are only available to borrowers who have a high debt-to-income ratio. Each of them calculates the payments a bit differently. They're all based on your adjusted gross income. And again, there's that new plan coming out next year that, at least by my initial view, is much better than all the other plans. If you're married, only two of the plans, PAYE and IBR, allow you to file taxes separately. So you can use just your income towards your payment calculations. Your filing strategy is going to end up, varying depending on, there's a few other factors to think about in filing, but just know that only two plans even allow you to use your individual income if you're married. You can also reduce your AGI and therefore reduce your loan payments by doing things like contributing to tax-deferred retirement accounts, like your 401k or 403b, flexible spending accounts, health spending accounts, pre-tax commuter programs, and other pre-tax deductions, including health insurance premiums for partners or dependents. So there's a few, there are things you can do to reduce your adjusted gross income, because ultimately you want to be paying, again, the least amount possible over those 120 payments to make sure that you get the maximum forgiveness. This is also why $10,000 of loan cancellation, for example, isn't going to make a huge difference for somebody who, say, owes $150,000 of federal student loan debt. It'll bring their balance down, but ultimately it actually won't change their monthly payment because their payment's based on their income, not based on their loans. So it won't change their monthly payment. They'll still reach 120 payments at whatever point, and then they get the rest of their balance forgiven. However, importantly for people pursuing PSLF, the last 18 months when you didn't have to make payments, that's all counted as a payment towards PSLF. So if you entered, say you started a job in February 2020, that was a qualifying job and you hadn't worked in one before, and here you are now, you have 18, if not 19 qualified payments already without actually having to pay a dime towards your loans. So that's a bigger deal, as equal to, or actually a bigger deal for many borrowers with high student loan balances than the $10,000 would be. So pursuing public service loan forgiveness. How do you really get started? Do you know if you're eligible? So number one, you have to verify your employment history and your loan types. Again, verifying your loan type, the best way to do this is on federal student aid, FSA. Log in. If you don't have an FSA ID, create one, log in, take a look at your loans. Each loan should say sort of what type of loan it is, as well as who the issuer and the owner of the loan was. And again, you're looking for direct loans, direct unsubsidized, direct subsidized, direct consolidation. Those are the loans you're really looking for. Also, you have to verify your employment and your employment, not just your current employment, but your employment history. So, did you have, actually, I had a client in this situation. She had worked for a qualifying employer for like 11 years, worked with the federal government before leaving and going to work at a 501c4 organization. So she had thought that before the waiver that she wasn't eligible because she hadn't done her paperwork at the time. She was on older loans, they weren't consolidated. And now she was working for an ineligible employer. Because of the waiver, she was able to go back and apply, certify her employment, and then get all of her loans. She had like 100,000 or something from law school, and get them totally wiped out and zeroed out. And that's really great for her and her family. So again, look back at your employment history. Do you have something in your past that could count while you were in repayment? Does your employment now count? Do you think, the next job you might get, do you think that might qualify? We have a few things to think about there. The second step, again, if your loans are not direct loans, they're one of those older types of loans, to qualify for PSLF, if you don't already have those 10 years of payments, to qualify to continue building credit in the future, you need to consolidate them into a new direct consolidation loan. This is done through the Department of Education. I think I have the link on the next slide. And you have to do that before the end of this month. The application takes, about 10, 15 minutes total. It'll take time for it actually to be processed and finalized, but you have to start that and submit it before the end of the month. You may also want to consider consolidation if you have loans with varying payment histories. So let's say you got your bachelor's degree, you went to undergrad, then you worked at like a community organization for a few years, a 501c3, and then you went to grad school, took out more loans for grad school, and now you work again at another C3. You can consolidate your loans, combine your undergraduate federal loans with your graduate federal loans, complete the employment certification forms, and then get the payment history from the oldest loan to apply to all of your total loans. So you could get like an extra few years of loan payments to count towards what you're ultimately aiming for. Again, 120 payments. And again, on consolidation, if you do have those older loans, it's worth thinking about, is what you're looking for public service loan forgiveness, and you want to make sure you've got credit for past payments, or is what you're looking for the $10,000 or $20,000 under Biden's cancellation plan? If you have those older loans, it is a little bit of an either or choice because of the announcement that the Department of Education made just this week. Third step is to apply into the public service loan forgiveness program. Even if you don't have those 10 years of payments yet, you actually want to be applying each and every year. The way you apply is simply by completing the employer certification form. So it's a form that basically tells the Department of Education and MOHELA, which is the student, the loan servicer that facilitates the PSLF program. I could do a whole presentation about how terrible all the services are. That's a different, a little bit of a tangent, but it is important always to sort of double check your work, because you don't want to ever give them an opportunity to say you didn't do it right. You complete the form that basically says, here's where I worked over these time periods. I want my payments to be counted toward during that time frame to count towards public service loan forgiveness. You have to print it out. You have to sign it. Somebody from your employer has to sign it. It has to be a real signature. Even from a past employer, you just have to get somebody who can, is authorized to say that you worked there during those timeframes. There is an option to say, like, if that place doesn't exist anymore, or you can't contact anyone who can sign for you, there is a box you can check, in which case you'll be asked probably many months from now to provide documentation of your work history, usually your like a pay stub or your W-2. So if there is anyone that can sign for you, it is usually easier to just do the traditional route and have somebody sign than to say, I can't get a signature, but I did work here. but that is an option. And so even if you don't have enough credit to receive forgiveness, immediately, you should still apply. And again, complete those employer certification forms every year, every single year, until you eventually receive 120 qualifying payments, in which case then your loans will be completely and totally canceled, tax-free. Processing times right now at the Department of Education are terrible. It's taking some people 6 months to hear back on their with an updated count of their payments. I have at least one client who should be getting total cancellation right now, and they just haven't heard back yet. They filled out their forms a while ago. So the one thing you also have to be prepared for is to be patient. The Department of Education says, they're going to get to everyone. They're going to apply all the standards of the waiver as long as you, did your signatures and put it in the mail before the 31st. So that leaves a little bit of time, but not a lot of time for sort of waiting around, figuring out what you're going to do. It is important to have a plan now, so you have some time to sort of make sure all those steps are in motion. Some resources and tools. The Department of Education Loan Simulator. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good way to estimate potentially what your monthly payment would be in a different repayment plan or with a different income. When loan payments start in January, they'll start at, again, the exact payment amount you were expected to make, when loans were shut off in March of 2020. They are not supposed to ask you to recertify your income if you're on an income-driven repayment plan, I believe, for at least 6 months after payments start. Or they might send you the thing asking you to do it, but the due date would be, 6 months after loans restart. If your income's gone up in the last 2 years, there's no reason to, qualify your recertify your income any earlier than you need to, because that's only going to bring up your monthly payment. But you can take a look through Loan Simulator to see what would your payment be. The Student Borrower Protection Center has great resources around student loans, both how to apply into these programs, how to make sure that if you have anything you need to appeal, how to deal with that. Their website is protectborrowers.org. I'm going to try to put these all in the chat when we're doing Q&A. And then another really important resource, the PSLF Employer Certification Form. I would not recommend using the PSLF help tool. That's a tool that is supposed to help you fill out the form. Their database of employers is super out of date, so they might say that your employer is not eligible when they actually are. Just go ahead and do the paper form. You have to print out the form anyway, sign it manually. So go ahead and just fill out the form. Again, print it out. You have to sign it. You have to get your employer representative to sign it and then mail it in. I would always recommend mailing something like this by certified mail, just so you make sure it gets there. Again, you want to leave very little room for anything to go wrong. I'll also grab the link for loan consolidation too, so that you have that, but that's also on studentaid.gov. So with that, I'm going to take a little drink of water because I've been talking for a while, and turn it over for questions. I'll also stop the screen share. And yeah, I will let David explain how we're going to do questions.
Thank you very much for that. So yeah, go get what you can here. We'll get this little bit of reform, and then along the way, we'll get past that and abolish all the debt and do a few other things. But good to get you some relief in the meantime.
Yeah, get your loans forgiven, and then start donating what you would have paid for towards your loans towards GSA.
All right, so I think that's it, unless anybody has any final questions.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you, everyone else who came out. I hope this was valuable. It's been a while since we did a night school, and I apologize for that. We're going to have some more stuff coming up. It'll be a little different. I believe we're going to have sessions coming up soon on the Supreme Court and why it's bad. The Brazilian elections, probably also why they're bad. Something on I-82, and maybe a few other things where we're going to get back to more regular night schools, and very glad to kick that off with Ethan and all of you tonight. So thank you and good night.
Good night, y'all.